Let's see what one of the driving forces behind this report believes. Dr. Margaret Faux is a solicitor, a PhD in Medicare claims and compliance. She joins me now. Dr. Margaret Faux, thanks for your time. What do you say in response to Karen Price there?
Well, look, I'm very disappointed in the response of the AMA and the RACGP today, because I'd just like to set the record straight on a couple of things. This is not anecdote. This is not sensationalist. This is my PhD. This is science. This is evidence. This is 8 years of dedicated work exploring this very complex issue. And I have reported the best available evidence that we have. So, look, I think from the RACGP and AMA, look, they're lobby groups, so you would expect them to come out strongly in support of their members. So there's no real surprises there. But, you know, a person in my position who is an academic who spent 8 years of her life and 4 decades working in this area to examine this problem in a lot of detail, to have the AMA suggest that it's anecdote and it's sensational. I mean, a person in my position would normally be quite offended, but I'm not. I'm just not surprised and a bit disappointed. Look, the evidence is very clear. We have a hemorrhaging Medicare system. Fraud is not being detected. The 4 levels of compliance that Medicare, that you saw the President talk about, are not effective. And in fact, one of the points I would make is that it's very evident from the President's comments that she has not read my PhD. And you should be reading, you know, about Medicare reform if you are interested in Medicare reform, because if you read it, you would know that the 4 levels of Medicare compliance that she correctly described have been proven to be ineffective. So, you know, that's my response to the AMA and RACGP. But what I want to do now is focus on where to from here.
Sure. And before we do that, and I will ask you about that because I'm intrigued by the story and I want to hear your view on that. But before we do, I've got to give you a right of reply as well, because Professor Price also suggested a level of conflict of interest here, because you run an organisation that provides support for doctors in terms of Medicare compliance and claims. What do you say to that?
Again, the organisations that have the conflict of interest in this area are the RACGP and the AMA, because they are basically paid or fed by this system that I am actively advocating to change, which is actually counter to my interests. You know, it's in my interest to say nothing. That's what's in my interests, to run my business and not to speak about the waste that I see every day. So I find Karen's comments really quite insightless, because the organisations who have the conflict here, it's not me, it is the AMA and the RACGP. And the other point I would make is that it's academic research. And one of the reasons I actually decided to do a PhD, I knew this was a massive problem way, way, way back. I knew it. It was really broken even when I began back in 2012. But I thought to myself, I need to position this in a university. If we want this problem to be solved properly and have credibility and academic rigour around the work, I made the decision that someone had to do a PhD on this, and it was going to be me. And I would have academic supervisors who were constantly checking me, checking the evidence, checking what I was doing, to make sure that I reported the best available evidence that we could collate, and that is what I've done.
You said that you think most Australians believe doctors are honest people, and I'd like to think that most of them are. And that was certainly, I think, the sentiment from the Prime Minister. He was very much supporting the medical fraternity and their performance during COVID and so on. But some of the egregious breaches that you've found and reported on in your PhD are quite shocking, aren't they?
Absolutely shocking. And look, I unfortunately see them every day. Every day I have the things I see, the things I deal with. And I think that's important for your viewers to understand too. In addition to my academic work, Dr. Karen Price is quite right. I actually do this work. I administer Medicare, and like all industry PhDs, so if you're, let's say you're an orthopaedic surgeon and you do a PhD on a particular new hip joint, some would argue you've got a conflict of interest, but most would say, no, these industry PhDs are really important because people that actually put the hip joint in are probably better positioned to do research in the area because they have real world experience of how that hip joint works or doesn't work, and we could make it better. So for me, I'm much the same because I administer this beast and have done for 4 decades. I see firsthand what the problems are. And therefore, I feel I'm in a very good position to support the government of the day to solve some of these problems because I know where they are. I see where things are happening all the time. And not a lot of people, if I only had my academic lens and I didn't actually administer the scheme, then I think I wouldn't have been able to, propose the reforms that I have been able to propose.
Just finally, where does the $8 billion come from? Obviously, it's a broad range of areas given the complexity and breadth of Medicare, but can you give our viewers a sense of where this leakage unfolds within the medical system?
Yeah, sure, of course I can. So the first thing is my research had to conclude something, and what it concluded was that the amount of leakage from Medicare was the same or higher than the highest previous estimate. Again, not interested in anecdotes and stories. This is evidence. So the earlier PhD, which is evidence, and that was published in 2004, the highest possible estimate in that PhD was 25, and I quote, it says, could be 25% or higher. And that was reported back in 2004. So this problem's been around for a very, very long time. And nothing since then, complexity has increased exponentially, as Dr. Price has correctly stated. Support has decreased to the point where it's almost non-existent. And there's no controls. We took out more controls in the system. So it can only be higher than it was back then. And that's how the evidence gets us to 30%. But can I say this to you? I will stand by that 30%, but separate to the evidence, my opinion is that it might be higher. Because from what I see every day, the 30% is it's based on evidence, but that's conservative. It would not surprise me if it's higher.
Dr. Margaret Faux, I appreciate your time. Intriguing research that you've done. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye-bye.